Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy Jack Slack here, the Ricardo Arona of MMA podcasting. So lie back and relax as I hold you down under the weight of my opinions for the next 3 rounds. You're unlikely to get hurt. We're recording on a Wednesday, so we've got a good deal of catching up to do from the weekend. We'll start with a little bit of news. The only really notable story this week... Bellator's going to Chicago for Rampage vs. Mo 2, as if anyone gives a shit. The only really notable piece of news this week was that Badr Hari just got sentenced to 2 years for an assault. One of the assaults he committed, whichever one was the most recent, or whichever one he just got tried for. The way it was reported in the article I read was Cristiano Ronaldo's friend, Badr Hari, sentenced to 2 years. Not best heavyweight kickboxer in the world. Oh well, got to get the clicks in somehow. And if you can cast aspersions on Cristiano Ronaldo's friends, that's a good thing to do. But the heart of the story is that he's probably only going to get 6 months. But is there anything more Badr Hari than coming back, slapping around the best heavyweight in the world, losing in a bizarre finish, and setting up the easy rematch money, and then going to prison for 6 months, or 2 years if he doesn't behave himself? And to be honest, I wouldn't hold my breath, because Badr Hari's a really weird guy in that he's 6'4", he's the best heavyweight kickboxer in the world, and he's still goaded into fighting on the street or assaulting people. There's 2 ways you can go as a fighter. You can either think that fighting is going to solve all your problems in every circumstance, or you can treat fighting as your business, in which case the most valuable things to you are your time and your health. You don't start risking your health in street fights, and you don't start risking your time by breaking the law. There's a reason that suspensions are the big punishment for drug use. You only have a very limited window in which to do stuff. And Badr Hari has, for the recent years, been wasting his time, basically. And then he had this big fight with Rico, and we saw the potential that he still has, and the ability that he still has. And you can't help thinking, why did this guy waste so much of his life? When he could have been earning millions, knocking people out. Certainly very marketable fighter, even as a bad guy. Anyway, let's talk about the event this weekend. The big story was the comeback of the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung-jung, now actually billed as the Korean Zombie, which is really weird. In fact, it's kind of lame. I never minded like Shogun Hua or Mirko Cro Cop, but it is a bit weird using a guy's nickname as his actual name. Just sounds strange to me, to my ear. But, if he wants to be called that, rock on. And Chan Sung-jung, is a mouthful for the Western audience. And of course, you've got the ordering of the names. Hongman Choi is one that everyone always gets, changes around every time someone says it. Anyway, he came back against Dennis Bermudez. In my article last week, I was talking about the fact that even after 4 years off or whatever it's been, this is a really challenging match for the Korean Zombie because he's never fought a really top-tier wrestler. The best wrestler he fought, in fact, the only good wrestler he fought was Aldo, who took him down 5 out of 6 times, I think it was. A couple of those off flying knees because the Zombie makes bizarre decisions. But equally, if you haven't fought anyone with great takedowns and then you come back to fight Dennis Bermudez, that's a hard ask. And his takedown defense looked stellar. He was shaking them all off like it was nothing. Only problem was that his head movement seemed to have ring rust on it. Someone needs to buy that guy a maze-ball badly. He was getting his head jacked back by some Dennis Bermudez punches. And Bermudez, not a light hitter by any means. But the finish came quite early. Zombie caught him with the uppercut. Loves his uppercut. He loves to slip an uppercut, slip the jab to the outside and then come with the uppercut. He also likes to do the slip to the outside and throw a very long uppercut at opponents. I think he caught Bermudez ducking onto it, but he laid him straight out, followed with punches. Some people were saying it was an early stoppage. I didn't see that at all. I saw Bermudez fall on top of his own arm, which is always one of those bad ones where they've got to recover their arm before they get to work defending themselves. If you see a guy fall in a crumply way like that where the opponent comes down on top of him, probably going to be a stoppage because they're not really going to be able to defend themselves. I mean, vintage Chan Sung-jung, accurate, hits hard, very hittable, weird choice of technique, which could easily be punished by a much better striker, leading with the uppercut like that. He did the same thing as Poirier, really long right uppercut, put him on wobbly legs for the finish. But regardless, great to have him back and really encouraging that he doesn't look like shit. Someone put up I think it was a Korean person, put up a really interesting thing on Reddit this week about Jung's military service, and I figured that Jung would be in a sort of something officey, or maybe they'd allow him to train in the meantime, because the Korean system's a bit weird. Like, they've let off pop stars, but if you're a professional athlete, they might still make you do it. And Chan Sung Jung was, he lost his title fight, but he was in the running for the title of the world, But apparently, you get graded on your health, which is fairly standard in the military draft. But Jung's recently separated shoulder, which was separated by that missed punch by Aldo, over the missed punch by the zombie, apparently that saw him downgraded to the second worst level of fitness for a cadet, even though he was a world-class athlete in his sport. And that meant that he got an easier gig and was able to train more in his free time. I don't know the truth about that, but I thought it was a really interesting story. In which case, good guy Aldo for fucking up the zombie's arm and then kicking it relentlessly. That fight actually is... when people say that Aldo doesn't have killer instinct, I think that fight is one of those ones where you separate what is killer instinct. People complain about fighters not jumping in on their opponents and finishing, but if you see the guy's got an injured shoulder and you immediately set to work kicking him in that arm without any remorse at all, I think that's killer instinct in a nutshell. I mean, there's not a huge amount to say about that because it was such a short fight. The one I really enjoyed on this card was Angela Hill versus Jessica Andrade. I had my eye on Jessica Andrade for a while now. I saw her beat up Rosie Sexton in, was that Manchester or London? Yeah, that's the fight I always use as an example of the attitude in the atmosphere in an arena affecting how you feel about a fight. Rosie Sexton, good English lass. Everyone was rooting for her, obviously, and the crowd were just dead throughout as she ate about 200 punches from Jessica Andrade. And I was sitting there going, Jesus Christ, she's dying here. Stop the damn fight. And Rogan on commentary was doing the same. And then I got home and watched the fight on TV, and it wasn't, it was still an ass kicking, but it wasn't as bad as I remembered it. I think the fact that the crowd were in dead silence probably helped a lot in shaping my opinion of that fight. But yeah, Andrade has always been a little powerhouse. And now she can actually strike and is making really good strategic decisions. Now, I wrote an article about this fight afterward. In fact, I've written 2 women's MMA pieces this week, which is very strange for me. But I wrote an article after this calling it the best women's strawweight fight I'd ever seen. And I don't know, was Jessica Penne versus Michelle Waterson at strawweight? Or was that atomweight or something? It was certainly the best one in the UFC so far for me. And some people got so offended by that, by me saying, in my opinion. And the reason that I liked it so much was because it was, as much as some people saw a one-sided ass-kicking, I saw 2 very distinct game plans being played off against each other. Because if you actually watch the fight, I mean, Angela Hill comes up on the losing end in all 3 rounds, I think. But when she's using her long techniques, her jab, and the long kicks to the legs and the body and stuff, she's lancing Andrade up. Like, if she hadn't thrown her right hand at any point in that fight, I think Angela Hill could have won it. It was the fact that Angela Hill's best weapon is her right hand. She's 5'2", and you're asking her to fight long. Her last fight was, or at least the fight before it, was against a 5'8" lass. So she was trying all the way through to get on the inside and throw that right hand. And now she has to be like the outfighter. Very strange turn of events, and I thought she did a really good job at that. And I have not given Angela Hill much credit in the past because the last fight I remember of hers, after this I watched all her Invicta fights and I was so impressed because the last fight I remember of Angela Hill's was the Tisha Torres one, which was just awful. That was Tisha Torres taking her down because she knew she couldn't stop the takedowns and then sitting in half guard because she couldn't do anything. It was one of the worst fights I've ever seen in the UFC, at least. But I was so impressed with Angela Hill in this fight, and I think that it's a bit unfair. People remember it, people were jumping on me about how it was a one-sided ass kicking, and I only thought it was a great fight because one person had a chin and took a ton of punishment. No, I thought it was a great fight because I thought they were adapting and changing, and if one of them had made a mistake, they were going to pay for it in terms of the other person's game plan catching up with them. Whenever Hill stopped and threw her right hand, that was when Andrade could come in with the left hook and rush her to the fence. But she could lance her up with jabs and things like that. choosing to use the elbows in the last round was really affecting the course of the fight. Dropped her with a short elbow. Hill dropped Andrade with the elbow. Looked like a push live, but I watched it again. It's an elbow, which is really cool. I think if you did that fight again in 3 months' time, and Angela Hill worked just on the jab, added in the oblique kick to the lead leg, and worked on intercepting elbows when Andrade rushed in, I think she'd have a really good chance in the rematch there. The other thing she was doing nicely was the double collar tie, and we're going to talk about this in Fortuna versus Hamilton, which is the other fight I wanted to touch on from this card rather. Double collar tie, sometimes very good at stopping the other guy from working, sometimes it just opens up your body for them to hit. It depends on their posture and their height a lot of the time. If you can pull a guy's head forward of his hips, you can ruin his punching power. And your forearms are in front of his collarbones, so you can stop him rotating his shoulders as much. But if he's really good at standing upright and he pushes his hips into you, he can just bang your body freely, which is what the Diaz brothers do. Fabio Maldonado had some good success with that too. But Hill did a really good job of breaking Andrade's posture with it. Andrade, for her part, ton of improvement in my eyes. I watched her against Rosie Sexton, and I watched a load of her other fights at bantamweight and things like that. And what I saw was the early Cyborg / Vanderlei Silva style windmilling. This fight, she's doubling, tripling up with whichever hand Hill's moving into. She's banging up and down, body in the head, and the body work made the difference in this fight. If she'd been working the body against Rosie Sexton probably wouldn't have seen the final bell. Andrade threw 200 strikes landed 200 strikes against Rosie Sexton, and 20 were to the body. You could do that by accident. That could just be things hitting her shoulders or chest that you meant to the head. But in this fight, she was banging the body constantly. It was the first thing she went for each time she found an opening. And that's the stuff that stays with a fighter. If you get hit in the head, if you're given room to breathe, that can just leave very quickly. It'll tire you out and it'll hurt, but you can get your senses back together. If you get hit in the body, that stays with you. So absolutely cracking fight. If you haven't seen it, or if you saw it and you didn't appreciate all the stuff that was going on, go watch it again. It's a lot more back and forth than a lot of people seem to think it was. And that's what made it such a good fight for me, because it was a two-part striking contest in which I saw things which each person could do to stop the other person from having as much success. And I saw them attempting to do these sort of things. Lots of people say the best strawweight fight was Gedalia versus Jędrzejczyk 2. To be honest, that was Claudia Gedalia holding Joanna down for 2 rounds and arm punching and then gassing out. Gedalia is a 3-round fighter built to win 2 rounds, and her striking is very, very primitive. So I'm always going to have a bias towards a good striking match between 2 good strikers. But, I can understand where people come from. That was a high stakes fight, and it did look like Joanna was in the hole 2 rounds down. But the last 3 rounds was just her working over a heavy bag, so, wasn't as good in my eyes. But, to each their own. That's the whole thing about opinions. Someone was like, oh, you're normally so accurate, but this is inaccurate. And I was like, how do you have an inaccurate opinion? That doesn't... that makes no sense. And then the other one that I really liked from that card was Hamilton versus Fortuna, mainly because Fortuna has gigantic bollocks. What was he, 210 pounds against a 258 pound guy? He was giving up 50, 60 pounds or something like that. Really impressive knockout, but it makes it clear that you don't want to be doing that. That's not fun at all. He was getting the double collar tie on Hamilton, and Hamilton was just too tall, too big, too strong. So Hamilton's hurting him with these little punches in the clinch. Slappy connections, but with a guy that big, they're still going to hurt. But the knockout was absolutely stellar. Fortuna hurt him with a right hook on the way backwards, and then shortly after that, he comes in with the right hand. Hamilton starts swinging his own, and we get one of those turn off the lights, but the momentum is still going moments, where Hamilton's still punching in the stance and throws himself to the floor unconscious. Really cool. But no, I would not want to see Fortuna doing that. I mean, when you've got a choice between competing at heavyweight and light heavyweight, heavyweights are less athletic. They are a considerably worse division. But then the light heavyweight division is so short on talent at the moment. And any connection at heavyweight is going to cost you dearly. And you don't want to be fighting guys like Derek Lewis, who are just gigantic and they'll just hold you down. You might be a much better fighter technically. There's nothing you can do about a 280-pound dude just ragdolling you to the floor and smashing you in the head with his with his cinder block-sized hands. Wasn't an awful lot going on otherwise on that card. Won't bother with the Grasso Herrick fight. Let's do some listener mail. Oh hoy, Jack. Thanks for the brilliant coverage of the fighting arts and the podcast. Question. To what end should I feel guilty about taking pleasure from watching, for example, Gary Goodridge, brackets Riddick Bowe James Toney, close brackets, back in the day, now he suffers from CTE / dementia pugilistica? Cheers, Christopher. That's a good question. It's a question that I ask myself a lot too, and I've been doing this for God knows how long. I don't like downplaying the very real stakes of professional fighting. Even fighting at an amateur level. If you're taking blows to the head, you are diminishing yourself. Perhaps your actual self, as in your identity. Now, Gary Goodridge is a very extreme case because he was the victim of perhaps the most predatory matchmaking I've ever seen in kickboxing and MMA. He could hit very, very hard, but he couldn't fight very well. And because he was scary and interesting to look at, the Japanese kept booking him into fights with world-class kickboxers, which he shouldn't have been in. He was just on streaks of getting knocked out. And they just kept paying him to do it. Now, as far as when anyone says, oh, no commission would sanction that in the US, yeah, they would. People give far too much credit to commissions which they just haven't earned. I've very, very rarely seen a fight not be sanctioned due to one fighter not being good enough or one fighter getting knocked out too much. Commissions don't want to turn down money. But what happened to Gary Goodridge was exploitative to the most disgusting level that I've seen in MMA, perhaps except some of what Scott Coker's doing. Except Scott Coker is doing like one-off weird fights, and old men versus old men. He's not putting... Well, I don't know, Dada versus Kimbo was a guy who'd never fought properly before against a guy who'd been paid to do it for years. But certainly it wasn't just one guy getting knocked out over and over again and still being put in against the best kickboxers in the world. It's like if he took Mike Jackson, the guy who fought Mickey Gall, and threw him in with Michael Chandler and then the rest of the Bellator lightweights in order. It was ridiculous matchmaking. With that being said, you can fight a very ordinary career or even a very good career and still end up with tremendous damage to your brain. I was writing something about this for the book I've got coming out soon, but the way that blows to the head affect people is in no way uniform, and that is what's terrifying about it. Let's compare two people from exactly the same time who fought very similar fighters and had similar length careers. Jerry Quarry and George Chuvalo. Chuvalo is known for his amazing chin, something you only find out if they get hit in the head tons. Chuvalo is still lucid and well-spoken and with it in his 70s. Jerry Quarry, 4 years after he retired, was living with his brother and didn't know where he was. Absolutely terrifying. And there was nothing that Quarry took in the ring that Chuvalo didn't. The art is in the fact that this moment is fleeting, that it won't be repeated. It's a one-off. I think the important part about fighting is that every fighter's career is it might not even be an arc. It might be several arcs and slumps, but it's a path. The fighter might be improving technically, but they're diminishing physically. In the early part of the career, it seems to be all on the up physically and mentally. But you are playing with resources. You only have so much money in the bank. A fighter's career, especially now we get it down on film, is art. It's fleeting, it's momentary, and it's not supposed to last. When I see guys coming back over and over at like 39, 40, 41, that's when it starts to upset me. But the stakes of this game are very real, and it is not for the squeamish. And it is only for the athletes themselves who are comfortable with putting that on the line. There's an awful lot of not talking about it and not thinking about it in gyms and in fighters' lives in general. But To me, fighting is an inherently very dangerous act, but it is between two consenting adults, and if they are fighting for something that means something to them, that's important. It's why I'm against children fighting. It's why I'm pretty much against the amateur fight game. Fight should be for a reason. There should be a reason for a guy to get in a cage and to get hurt. Even if you win, you get hurt. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in as a spectator, knowing that these people are damaging themselves for the future. But it is a choice they've made, and the art that takes place between them is often incredibly technical and beautiful. And there's nothing else in the world that comes close to that except life and death fights between animals in the wild. If you're trying to replicate that in a sporting capacity, you can't do it without someone getting hurt. But you can't do an awful lot of things without risking being hurt. The entire US stopped to watch the Super Bowl this weekend, which I just recently caught up on, and it was good fun. But everyone knows that a lot of those guys are going to end up with holes in their brain. A lot of them are going to commit suicide. A lot of them probably already have some form of brain damage or CTE. It's just not spoken about. I think the best thing about the fight game is that we are open about it. We understand that guys are going to get hurt, and that's just part of the game. As opposed to the NFL and rugby and things like that, who is pushed to the background. It's considered an aside. When you understand the stakes of what's going on, you can respect the performers better, you can ensure that they get paid better, and you can start to push for better healthcare, medicals, requirements, things like that. The fact that all eyes are on the fight game expecting people to get hurt and to die makes the fight game a lot safer than many of the sports who don't have that sort of scrutiny on them. Now, I've tried arguing with people many, many times, trying to get them to like fighting when they think it's brutal and people get hurt and brain damaged. And the truth is that I don't think you can argue someone into liking fighting, and push the brain damage issue under the rug. I think if you've had a little bit of what's going on explained to you, you will either enjoy the fights or you won't. It's something very primal within you that decides whether you do. But if you do enjoy them, enjoy them. You don't have to feel guilty about decisions other people are making in hopes of bettering their lives and securing their place in history within their sport. The only thing you can do to stop things like Gary Goodridge and stuff like that is just not buy the cards from promotions who are so clearly manipulative. I shit on Bellator a lot, but they have a lot of good fighters, and for me it's very hard wanting to watch, well, it used to be Will Brooks and Michael Chandler and people like that, but not reward Bellator for letting Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie fight in 2016. But that's the struggle of being a fight fan. Some of it's beautiful, some of it's just hideous. But I've rambled enough. I hope that helps, and I've not quite entirely cleared up my opinions on CTE and the damaging nature of this sport. I just know that I enjoy it. Which might make me awful, but I don't know. Anyway, cheers, Christopher. Hey, Jack. Big fan of your podcast and your articles. Keep up the great work. The question I have is about the UFC middleweight champion Michael Bisping. I wonder what you think when people would actually take him seriously as a champ, if ever. Clearly he is not very popular in the US, and was, in my opinion, always one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. Partly because he can be quite a jerk, and partly because a lot of people don't appreciate his skills in the octagon. Bisping is now on a 5-fight winning streak, his longest in the UFC, with beating Dollaway, Laties, Silva, Rockholder and Henderson, which is truly an impressive streak. But how many wins, and against whom, will he need to be truly accepted as champion in your opinion? Greetings from Germany. Jan. A question about his fistic majesty. You know he's already the champion in my opinion. He's the champion of every division. No, in seriousness, don't confuse disliked with unpopular. Bisping is still a fairly big star for the UFC. And the fact, part of it is that people think he's a massive jerk. And some of them think he's a lovable jerk. Well, I think he's a lovable jerk. And I think the whole paper champion thing that people accuse him of being, or fluke champion or something like that, might even help sell tickets, especially when he keeps going on about how he's the best and he won't fight so and so, but he'll fight so and so. Yeah, a bit of controversy is very good for selling fights. Now, to be taken serious, I think if he beats Yoel Romero, I don't think anyone will have any argument left. People will pretend that Anderson Silva was just not in the mood to knock him out, which is absolutely fucking ludicrous. And pretend that Luke Rockhold made a massive miscalculation jumping with his hands down, when Luke Rockhold's offensive boxing has always been like that. It was Bisping choosing to fight on the counter and refusing to run in and get check cooked by Rockhold that made Rockhold come forward and gave him those openings. Doesn't look good when you almost lose to, 50-year-old Dan Henderson, though? That fight was entertaining for a little bit, but also kind of embarrassing. No one in the middleweight top 15 has any business almost losing to Dan Henderson. He's got the one technique. He gasses out after the first round, and his chin's not there anymore. It's very, very embarrassing for Bisping that almost ended in a loss. Looking at Bisping's buy rates, he wasn't particularly successful in his last two. It's like 300,000 for the Henderson fight, which no one should have cared about, really. That was really just for the fanboys and for the UK audience to get not quite the title fight that they deserved. And before that, it was a last-minute replacement against Rockhold, which was almost a foregone conclusion in many people's minds. But I think if Bisping beats Yoel Romero with how good Yoel Romero has looked, I think you'll have no argument from most that he's the best middleweight on the planet. I can't see the argument for Bisping not being that good if he beats Romero, which is a hard ask, let's be honest. Especially with the trouble that Bisping had with Tim Kennedy. Next question. Jack, love the podcast. When people talk about cutting angles, would that be dodge your opponent's strikes by pivoting off, let's say their jab, getting out of the way and countering, or throwing your own jab as you are jabbing? And as you are jabbing, then moving out to the angle. Could you please go into depth or give some good examples? Thank you, Dylan. Not quite sure I understand the specifics of this question, but an angle is quite literally just changing your position from the opponent. That can be as small as taking your left foot slightly. Well, let's say you're orthodox versus orthodox. That could be as small as taking your left foot slightly out to your left so that you're opening up your hips better for an overhand, or you're lining up your right shoulder with their center line so that you can shoot a shorter right straight. Or that can be getting around literally behind someone. An angle is just changing where your attacks are coming from. To think of it like a clock face, everyone's defenses are set up at 12 o'clock. You practice all your defenses with your opponent directly in front of you. Nobody is good at slipping and countering when someone's moved off to 2 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Now, you're very rarely going to get in strikes on someone from there. They'd have to be a corpse for you to do that without them doing something about it. But as people turn, they're pivoting around 1 foot. When you're pivoting around 1 foot, you're very vulnerable because you can't transfer your weight into your punches while pivoting. With the exception of if you're pivoting in the same direction as the hook, but that's more of a counteraction rather than turning to catch up with someone. Angles, quite simply, and I said this in Finding the Art, are essentially just getting around behind someone and bashing them over the head with a rock. You don't want to be fighting someone head to head because you're meeting their strength with your strength. You ideally want them playing catch up or just running around to places where they can't hit you and hitting them from there, but they won't let you do that if they're any good at all. But people get tired and hurt and overcommit, so it does happen from time to time. Cheers, Dylan. Morning. Thanks for all the content. You are, capitalised, one of the good ones. Is that a Lovecraft thing? Following the success of the UFC fighters at Submission Underground, I was thinking about the effectiveness of top MMA striking in kickboxing. Do you think the generally greater distance used by MMA fighters, because of takedown threats, would present a stylistic challenge for top fighters in glory? Or would the crisper techniques of the specialists carry the day? Perhaps the defensive acumen developed from fighting with 4-ounce gloves might give some MMA fighters an advantage. Cheers, Lewis. Yeah, Chad Mendes and Shoeface did well in Submission Underground, as far as I can remember. Shoeface submitted Tonen, which is a big feather in the cap, but he's about 30 pounds bigger than Tonen. And Chad Mendes is also considerably bigger than Jeff Glover. However, if you think like MMA fighters are going to have shoddy grappling, definitely not true, because it's something you can train every day or almost every day. Guys can't spar hard on the feet every day, but they can grapple every day. And if you're getting enormously strong and doing it every day, regardless of whether it's in a gi context, a gi competition context, or a fighting context, you're going to get good at it. The thing about kickboxing, though, is that is you're dealing with, as you said, a completely different distance, a completely different dynamic. A lot of even the better strikers in MMA, guys like Martin Kampmann, JDS, back straight up onto the fence. And that's an issue against the right opponent in the cage. That's a massive issue against anyone in the ring, because you've got no space to move and make mistakes like that. Very few MMA fighters good at checking low kicks, though that is also affected by being aware of the takedowns. And of course, there's a whole category of technique which is important in kickboxing but not important at all in MMA. Things like push kicks, off-balancing people while they're kicking. Push kicks generally not that useful in mixed martial arts, but Joe Schilling and people like that have made careers out of it in kickboxing. If you throw out push kicks every time the other guy wants to round kick, you are just going to send him running across the ring, catching himself and sorting out his balance every time he does it, which can shut down his kicking game or make him more hesitant to kick. And every time you raise your knee, he's going to get up on one leg and you're going to be able to step in with punches, the old Schilling shift. Very different world, but equally there are a lot of kickboxers who do obsess with their hands. It's not like... I'm going to sound like one of those Muay Thai elitists now who are just awful people. But, in Muay Thai, there's a more pronounced guys doing different things. They call them like a Muay Cow or whatever it is. There's guys who do the knees. There's guys who do the elbows. There's guys who just do the throws from the clinch. And then there's guys who kickbox on the outside. Whereas in kickboxing, it's all either punches or kickers. There's no elbows. There's, you'll have the occasional guy who's great with knees. But the limiting on the clinch really affects that too. I mean, Alistair Overeem's kickboxing run in K1, a good deal of it against the better kickboxers like Remy Biansky was him throwing people to the floor illegally and the referee's not doing anything about it. I would like to see more MMA fighters in kickboxing, to be honest. I just there isn't a lot of money in it. But you're already seeing them. A lot of glory cards are bolstered by guys with maybe 2-3 fights. MMA fighters who have just taken up kickboxing. I love glory, but it becomes very apparent when you got the top 2 matches of the cream of the crop. You got your Robin van Roosmalens and your Rico Verhoevens, and then suddenly you're into guys who've come over from MMA and have only just made a start of their kickboxing careers. Oh, sorry, I left off the last part there. Perhaps the defensive acumen developed from fighting in 4-ounce gloves might give some MMA fighters an advantage. That's an interesting thought. I think it might actually work a different way. I think so many fighters train in big gloves in their kickboxing sparring, even though they should probably not. I think they'd feel like spoiled for choice when they suddenly put their hands up and those were blocking the shots, where in MMA proper they'd find themselves in trouble for trying to do exactly what they've been doing in training. I think I'd be more interested to see MMA fighters with good throws in Muay Thai, or at least like a mixed rules Sanshao thing with some Muay Thai people, because the clinch of Muay Thai is a very different dynamic. But it'd be interesting to see how it matched up when you allow the throws and trips that a lot of MMA guys are obviously excellent at. I don't think you're going to see anyone crossing over from MMA and picking up any kickboxing titles. Even guys like Dillashaw and Cruz, they're perfect ideas in striking for MMA. It sets up the takedowns beautifully, makes sure that there's plenty of distance when they want the distance, and they remove the distance when they want to strike or grapple. But I don't think that style is very much unique to MMA. It's built for that. It's not going to be that useful in kickboxing because of the enormous distances covered and the tiny rings. Right angles make a big difference to ringcraft. Anyway, cheers, Lewis. Right, let's have a quick talk about UFC 208 this weekend. This is a garbage card. I shat on this in my Holly Holm article yesterday on Tuesday. But it's a truly, truly strange card. It's got big names on, but they're all in bizarre fights. I'm hoping this is like a one-off, but it could be the cracks showing in the WME not knowing how to deal with the product they just bought. I'm going to read you a couple of the questions that I wrote down in my article. Why is Ronaldo Jacare Souza, top contender for the middleweight crown, fighting sub-top 10 ranked Tim Boetsch? And why did he have to place a fake Craigslist advert to gain attention before they actually gave him that fight? Why is the number 3 ranked Glover Teixeira taking on Janet Cannelloni, who's just come in at number 15, basically on the fact that this fight was announced, and then everyone, the 8 guys doing the ranking said, "Oh, I've heard of him, he can go in now." And then, most annoyingly, why is Wilson Hayes, who was given a title shot at Demetrius Johnson in June 2016, and Johnson pulled out with injury. Hayes has won another fight since then, hasn't lost. Why is he fighting on the undercard in front of a half-empty arena against an opponent with 1 win dating back to 2014? If anyone really wants to argue that the UFC knows what they're doing with the flyweight division, this is one of the weakest pay-per-views in recent history, and they're still hiding the world-class flyweight on the undercard. Unfucking believable. Anyway, the important fight is Jacare versus Tim Boetsch. Tim Boetsch is a pretty fun spoiler, to be honest. He has those wins over guys like Yushin Okami, Hector Lombard. You might not agree with the Lombard one, but certainly he can make life messy for fighters who are supposed to be a lot better than him. However, he is also one of the very, 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 very few people who ran straight onto Dan Henderson's right hand and gave him a win for free. Boetsch is a good wrestler, but he's not a big middleweight, and I don't know if he's a good enough wrestler to stop Jacare taking him down. Maybe Jacare tries to stand up, Boetsch catches him. Who knows? There'll probably be an upset of some kind on this card, but looking at these matches, it's just, why would you make them? I can't see Tim Boetsch gaining anything if he beats Jacare. No one is going to be clamouring for a Tim Boetsch title shot. We all know what he does. Anderson Silva versus Derek Brunson. This is a good fight for Silva, actually. I mean, Derek Brunson went full Brunson. Let's call it full Brunson. He went full metal Brunson in his last match. He'd been doing amazing on this streak of wins, and he'd been using pressure to fluster guys. And he just went all the way overboard against Robert Whittaker. Looked nothing like what we thought he was. It was just awful, just running in with his head about 3 feet forward of his hips, with his chin way up in the air, and diving for legs from miles out. Derek Brunson has enough skills. He out-wrestled Yoel Romero. He has enough skills that if he fought normally, like a normal fighter, he probably would have beaten Robert Whittaker. So if he runs forward with his chin out against Anderson Silva with no feints, that's Anderson Silva 101. You'll see Anderson Silva crack him with a counter, and everyone will go, "Oh, there we go, Anderson Silva's motivated again," as if it wasn't Michael Bisping and Chris Weidman feinting him out that made him mistime all his counters in the previous few fights. Anderson Silva still has a good deal of what makes him special. You saw the awesome kick against Daniel Cormier. He's going to struggle with the big, strong wrestlers. He always did. And he's going to struggle against guys who throw feints at him. However, Brunson is clumsy enough, or has been clumsy enough, that I could see Silva winning this one. Kind of throws a spanner in the works, though, because Brunson was supposed to be like one of our hot prospects, and it was all, the future of the middleweight division's so bright. Finally, main event, Homdurt versus de Randamie. You know how I feel about the women's featherweight division. I'm not rooting for it to fail. If they're bringing it in, I'd like it to do well and to grow into an interesting division, so that when I cover it, I actually enjoy it. And I like Holm and I like de Randamie, but it is a strange situation they've got here, and it does seem like they're trying to plug holes in the schedule with bits of silverware. So they're inventing this extra title. Holly Holm on a 2-fight losing streak. Go read the piece I wrote yesterday called The Curious Case of Holly Holm, where we basically talk about how it wasn't like a rising superstar. She wasn't looking very good in her UFC career until she got the Rousey fight. Then she was, she fought the perfect game plan against Rousey. I don't think anyone else could have done that. That comprehensive top to bottom taking apart of Rousey in her prime. Even if Amanda Nunes could beat Rousey in her prime, it would be by flattening her in a few seconds. It wouldn't be by taking her apart everywhere in the ring, defending herself perfectly in the clinch, circling out beautifully, counter-punching, and all that stuff. Holm versus Rousey was just one of the most beautiful science versus savagery fights I've ever seen in the UFC. But Holm was the perfect person to do that. When she met Miesha Tate, it was the first person she'd met with really good level changes and takedowns. Ronda Rousey does not level change. She has to walk right into the clinch from the outside, which is perfect for someone like Holly Holm, who excels in boxing range and is good enough to circle out each time. When she fought Miesha Tate put her face out there and said, "Hit me in the face." And in round 2 and round 5, she ducked in under the punches and got a hold of Holm's hips, and then got on her back both times. Then Holm fought Shevchenko, the first really good striker she'd fought, and was made to struggle with the distance. She was throwing those Carlos Condit-style running combinations. I mean, Holly Holm is the most accomplished female boxer ever, but she's not a classical boxer. If she went to, if she was a man and she went to a boxing gym, they'd be like, "What on earth is that you're doing?" She was trained by Mike Winkeljohn, who's a kickboxing coach, very good kickboxing coach, don't get me wrong, but he does a lot of walking with his punches and things like that, the shifting combinations, but she does a lot of that, and against Shevchenko, she was just hitting air, and she was kiaing every strike she threw, so you were even more aware that she was missing the entire time. So she lives in this sort of weird area where it seems like she wants an opponent who's coming at her, moving forward and easily hittable, but she doesn't want one who might duck under her punches when she throws them. She's in this area where she's a very incomplete fighter at the moment, it feels like. Because up to that point, up to the Rousey fight, she'd fought a couple of so-so fighters. I don't even know what Marion, what's-her-face, has been up to since then, but she also fought Raquel Pennington, who's been getting better, to be honest, but is more of like a scrappy all-rounder, not like a very dangerous wrestler or grappler or a striker. But as soon as Holm fought a couple of specialists, she really struggled. Even though she was winning that Tate fight until Tate got on her back and choked her out in surprising fashion. But that's what makes this fight so interesting. Germaine de Randamie is not, I wouldn't call her one of the best fighters in the UFC at bantamweight. She's de facto one of the top 2 fighters in the UFC at featherweight. But she is long. She does the phasic in and out movement like Shevchenko, which troubled Holm so much. And she's got decent boxing, great knees, great clinch work, good kicks, lots of power. She's a hard matchup for Holly Holm on paper, from what we've seen in Holm's last 2. I don't believe Holm's dropped off. I believe she was a perfect matchup for Ronda Rousey, and then met 2 opponents who had specific things that troubled her. But I'm pretty interested to see how this one goes. For all that bollocks about a made-up title and all that stuff, I'm really interested in this fight. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. If you are a Patreon boy, go and watch the Jack Johnson episode. It was terrific fun to research and write and speak. And if you are not a Patreon boy, go to the YouTube channel and find the video Jack Johnson and punching in the clinch or something like that. It's all about how Jack Johnson, he was basically the only fighter in boxing, or heavyweight boxing, that I've seen do this. He was very good at controlling the inside line, the biceps and the triceps in the clinch, and he was always free to punch. So he exhausted guys as they swung at him, and he was just covering their arms. And then he'd unleash these uppercuts, and they were incredible. And he also did an awful lot of interesting stuff, like gliding in from the outside and immediately clinching. Tons of checking of the opponent's hands. Obviously, George Foreman and his coach Dick Sadler were very inspired by that, and Sandy Sadler, obviously. Well worth your time to watch. It's about, I think it's 10 minutes, but it's just all the technical stuff from that episode. If you want to watch the full lecture, I suppose, then become a Patreon boy. And please continue sending your emails. I've got so many good ones this week that I'm going to do some of them next week too. fightsgoneby podcast@gmail.com. I've been your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Peace be with you, and Connor bless.